United States. A world leader and educator is being honored. His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. He is no stranger to the atmosphere of learning found on the campus of Georgetown University. Here, students are in direct association with world-renowned scholars in the field of foreign affairs, the arts, and the humanities. Here, the inquiring mind finds nourishment. During the 8-day visit of Haile Selassie to the United States, he will participate in many ceremonies that demonstrate the respect of a friendly nation. Several private cars carries the Emperor and his official party swiftly to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. This will be the first meeting for President John F. Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy with the man who played a leading role in the creation of African unity.
My fellow Americans in welcoming His Imperial Majesty back to the United States. Since His Majesty visited the United States nearly a decade ago, we have seen one of the most extraordinary revolutions in history. And that has been the appearance on the world scene of 29 independent countries in the short space of less than 10 years, including over 150 million people. The conference recently held in His Majesty's capital served, I think, to bring together in a great cooperative movement the people of most of these countries. And the success of that conference was due in no small part to the leadership of our distinguished guest. His efforts to move his country forward and provide a better life for its people. And his efforts throughout the world, which stretch back over 30 or 40 years. For all of this, Your Majesty, we take the greatest pride in welcoming you here. You do us honor, and I can assure you that there is no guest that we will receive in this country that will give a greater sense of livelier pride and satisfaction to the American people than your presence here today. Your Majesty, you're most welcome.
Mr. President, Mrs. Kennedy, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply touched by the generous words of welcome which you have addressed to me, Mr. President, and by the warmth with which the American people have greeted me during the few short hours I have been in the United States. In the decade which has elapsed since my first voyage to America, the face of the globe has been vastly altered. Africa and Asia have been transformed into continents whose people are almost entirely removed from the subjugated status which was the lot of so many of them but a few short years ago. As free men, we Africans are now seeking the unity and the oneness which will enable us to put our freedom to the best use. The service of the peoples of our continent, the defense of right and justice, the protection of the peace.
የህዝባችን ኑሮ ደረጃ ተሻሽሎ ድህነትና ድንቁርና ከዓለም እንዲወገድ ቁርጥ ሀሳብ አድርገናል።
Ethiopian women are among the welcoming crowds. The Emperor of Ethiopia has come to Washington to discuss important aspects of world peace and economic progress. He confers with President Kennedy on African problems and aspirations in these vital areas. To Abraham Lincoln. The Emperor and his party arrive at the Lincoln Memorial to place a silver wreath in honor of the American president, who is an international symbol of unity and freedom. President Kennedy's Secretary of Interior, Stuart Udall, accompanies the Emperor. Included in the Emperor's party are Ras Imru Haile Selassie, Ambassador Dinky, Ethiopian Ambassador to the United States, and Ambassador Kore, United States Ambassador to Ethiopia. Mr. Udall reads from Abraham Lincoln's immortal Gettysburg Address.
They gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
I'd like to invite our next guest, Frances Vieta. She lived in Rome, Italy for 27 years as a journalist and writer for both the American and Italian media. Her expert articles focus on a range of issues, including art, food, and terrorism. Ms. Vieta has been a long-time consultant with the Food and Agriculture Organization, with the World Food Program, and with several other UN agencies. She traveled frequently to Africa, and especially to Ethiopia. Her historical novel, Love in the Land of Barefoot Soldiers, is set during the 1935 conflict between Italy and Ethiopia, an astounding time period for Haile Selassie's leadership, as well as a country's adaptation to change and sustainable development. Her book is highly recommended, and we have it here on sale, and she'll tell you more about it now. Let's welcome Ms. Frances Vieta.
I'm very happy to be here this afternoon to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the United Nations and of Ethiopia's membership in that organization. I was invited to talk about my book, Love in the Land of Barefoot Soldiers. It is an historic fiction set in 1935 when the League of Nations that we've seen is unable to keep the peace and Italy invades Ethiopia. I call it a Gone with the Wind novel because it's a war story and a love story, the clash of cultures as well as political values. Before I speak about the book, I wanted to tell you how I got involved with Ethiopia. In November 1984, just about this time, the BBC ran a horrific documentary clips on the famine in Wallo, Korama actually, and I saw that, many of you US too, well, that was 30 years ago. And I had already been sent by the World Food Program, which is headquartered in Rome, to Mozambique to cover I was an investigative reporter, photojournalist, to cover a civil war there. And because of the Civil War, all the farmers could not farm. They've gone to the coast where the World Food Program was delivering emergency food aid from a boat that looked a lot like the ones that invaded at the Omaha beach. The front would go down and the food could come back off.
LC2.
What?
LCD.
Okay. Soon after that, the United Nations decided it had to do something about this famine, which was not only in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was one of the worst hit, so was the Sudan. But there was drought in most of sub-Saharan Africa that year. So they formed an Africa task force and asked me to join as an information officer, which I did starting in January 1985. And the first two people I met were Johannes Mengesha, the great-grandson of Haile Selassie, and Ketima Yifru, who had been the Ministry of Foreign Affairs responsible for negotiating a lot of the work that went into the Organization of African Unity. They were both, Yifru was Yifru's also the person in my book. He was the particular representative of the executive director of the World Food Program at this time. And he had spent 8 years in jail in Addis before he came to us. Johannes went on to have a fabulously important career in the United Nations, right here in New York, and he's been a friend since 1985. In the late 1950s, the face of Africa was changing, as we would have heard from President Kennedy's introduction. And Ketima Yifru looked at this and decided he thought that Addis and Ethiopia should be a real part of this movement. The first country to gain independence was Ghana in 1957. And when we get to 1963, when Haile Selassie comes to the United States to address the United Nations, he had just been in May organizing the African Unity there, which would find its headquarters in Addis for the next 50 years, 60 years, and it's still there. I regret to say that was Haile Selassie's second visit to the United States, and it was in October of 1963. You saw him with President Kennedy. He was back in the United States a month later, the only African head of state to represent Africa at President Kennedy's funeral. I'm trying to make this quicker so we have more time for questions. When I started doing the research for my book, I realized it was only in 1995 that Italy actually said that they had used mustard gas or admitted to any of the atrocities that had taken place. And the ambassador said that there were about 750,000 people killed during October 35 to May 36. But once Graziani took over the power, there were people killed on a regular basis. You were, I think, referring to the massacre after Graziani was the attempted assassination of Graziani, which for 3 days, 10,000 people in Addis Ababa alone were killed, including, as you said, monks or in the churches. It was a really horrific kind of thing. And why did Mussolini want Ethiopia? Well, obviously, you've seen from the clip. He wanted to join his own two colonies, but he also needed land. Ethiopia was 8 times as big as Italy, and very good agricultural land, and Italy is tiny and rocky, and he had a lot of people, like 45 million people. My book is actually 2 stories. The first is the history of Mussolini and Haile Selassie and the negotiations with the League of Nations. And as we said, Haile Selassie was a firm believer of the League of Nations, of collective security. But when he actually asked for help, nobody helped him. And actually, 8 days after that prophetic speech, in June 30th, 1936, they lifted the sanctions against Italy. And Italy stayed on for a couple more years until in June 10th, 1940, it declared war on England and France. And at that time, Italy left the League. Okay, then what happens when they declared war on Italy and Great Britain and France? Winston Churchill had the idea that he had the emperor as an exile since July of 1936. Could we use him and take the Italians out of the Horn of Africa and North Africa by invading Ethiopia from the Sudan? So a tiny, I mean really tiny, like 5,000 people, soldiers, including freedom fighters from the Patriots, they're called, from Ethiopia, joined together and they did exactly that. So 5 years to the date, May 5th, 1941, Haile Selassie was returned to his throne. And I think the time that he had spent with the League of Nations and the time he had spent in exile in England had to get a different vision of what the United Nations could be. First of all, the United States would join. And second, it had teeth, which the League of Nations never had. And it would make a big difference in the organization. Okay, the fictional part of my book is a touching love story. Touching, I don't know, but a love story in any case. A story of American archaeologist Cecily, who journeys to Ethiopia in 1935 to research the obelisk of the royal capital of Aksum. She falls in love with an Italian doctor, Marco, who has been in Ethiopia for 3 years trying to find a vaccine against malaria. I'm going to end these remarks here saying that the fact that Dr. Marco was trying to find a vaccine was very pertinent. In August, we were meeting at the UN to try to raise money to vaccine 3,000 to 5,000 Ethiopian families through nation-to-nation networking. And now the news of this vaccine is not great. It doesn't seem to be able to do what they thought it would be, but in any case, it's prophetic that it came about 80 years after my book. And my book was completely imaginary, so. I know there were a lot of questions, and Roger, you wanted to, not necessarily at me, but everybody?
Yes, we can open up the audience. I guess, yes, we'll take one from over here.
I got it.
I love what you're trying to do. I know if I get the chance, I'd love to get an opportunity to read the book.
It also comes in audio form.
Oh, really?
And my friend over there helped us with the Ethiopian words for the pronunciation. So it does come in audio and in Kindle.
Yeah, I kind of, this is a very deep spot for me, for family reasons. Number one, when I was an infant, Haile Selassie held me in his arms as a baby. He was up at, you were talking about when he was here in New York, and he had went by City University, okay? And my mom and dad were up there. And somehow they got this guy to hold on to this squalling baby in his arms, and I don't know what the hell happened to the picture. I wish I had it today. But second of all, what you're talking about as far as the United Nations, I think the big problem is that it might have started off on a good foot. Now, I think the biggest problem the UN has is that what I had mentioned before when I spoke to the other gentleman, the gentleman that was speaking previously, you have a very reactionary, the politics in this country has gotten very reactionary. So you actually have people holding elected office that talk about withholding.
Continue. Please.
So I wanted to hear it.
Okay.
You know, I the Republicans, I shouldn't bring politics into this, but when I moved back to New York in 1993, the United States was in arrears with its dues for the United Nations because the Republican Congress would not approve membership. They really were very anti-UN.
Yeah, and it's gotten worse.
Yeah,
It's gotten much worse.
It has gotten worse.
And that's what frightens me, because I'll say this and then I'll let somebody else get a chance. But I think that what needs to happen, and I think that this is what the reactionary forces in the United States in our politics are afraid of. You have the northern nations, basically, controlling either through military means or what have you, the wealth of the world, which they get from the masses of the country who live in the Southern Hemisphere. And what must be found among the UN and the representatives of these countries in the UN, they must bring this point out that, hey, we live on this planet together, and it's not right that you allow your rich folks in the north to sit upon, access to the world's resources and sit up, basically sit on top of the world's wealth. The whole thing with the Security Council, that needs to go away so that every nation can have an equal voice. It's my opinion.
Very good.
I left the UN in 2005, and I really can't, I am not the one to speak to these problems.
In this country, we talk quite often about the genocide, the Holocaust that existed in Europe during the Second World War. Very little is ever said about the Mussolini Italian Holocaust that went on in Ethiopia. I would just like you to maybe expand on that, about what happened to Ethiopia and why they never talk about the Holocaust that existed there, perpetrated by Mussolini and his troops.
Can I say something about that? That's what my book deals with exclusively.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you a clip in a few minutes after we've seen some others of that background of that war in Ethiopia, and that is the background I chose as my book. I was horrified at the use of mustard gas, and once I learned about it, I looked, there are a couple of history books on the subject, nobody ever mentioned it further, and I realized that a novel would get to a much wider public than an academic book on the subject. So in a few minutes I'll show you those clips.
At the National Legislature, the Vice President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson, and leaders of the Senate and House of Representatives hold discussions with the Emperor. This is where the men and women elected by the American people make the laws which govern them and determine American policies and world affairs. In the same room where President Kennedy holds his press conferences, the Emperor meets with over 500 representatives of the American and world press. He describes the purpose of his visit: to renew his acquaintance with our nation and to ensure that the ties of friendship which have linked the two countries over the years will be maintained and strengthened. In reply to one question, the Emperor says, "What interests us most in Africa today is the collaboration for the purpose of achieving unity for the benefit of Africa and as a contribution to world peace." Departing Washington, The Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, and Mrs. Rusk accompany the royal party to a heliport at the Naval Observatory near downtown Washington. Members of the diplomatic corps pay their respects to the Emperor and members of the official party, which includes his granddaughter, Her Highness the Princess Ruth Desta. The first stage of the journey is aboard President Kennedy's helicopter to the airport, then on to New York City. New York, America's largest city. Towers of concrete and steel and organized stone probe the sky. Here, knowledge and culture are available to all who seek it. In libraries, in art museums, in cultural centers. Here is the library of the famed Columbia University, where Princess Ruth and many other Ethiopians have studied. The city of New York, Robert F. Wagner and Mrs. Wagner greet the Lion of Judah on the steps of the City Hall. En route to the United Nations, where an open forum, nations can share the benefits of peaceful association. Secretary General U Thant greets the Emperor and is presented with the Charter of African Unity drafted at the Addis Ababa Conference and ratified by the African states. From the people of Ethiopia, a gift to the United Nations, a finely carved miniature of the great obelisk of Aksum, the ancient capital of Ethiopia. The Emperor addresses a special meeting of the General Assembly.
ክቡር ፕሬዚዳንት፣ የተከበራችሁ መልእክተኞች፣
The Charter of the United Nations expresses the noblest aspirations of man, the abjuration of force in the settlement of disputes between states, the assurance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, the safeguarding of international peace and security.
ሰብአዊ መብቱ እንዲጠበቅለት ለማረጋገጥ የዓለም ሰላምና ጸጥታ እንዲጠበቅ ለማድረግ የሚያስችሉትን የሰው ልጅ የሚመኛቸውን ከፍተኛ ዓላማዎች የያዘ ነው።
Television is another medium of communication through which millions of Americans see and hear the Emperor. On a program devoted to current events, the sight and sound of free discussion is transmitted to the television audience. Gathered in the Emperor's hotel suite is an important resource of his country. Young people increasing their knowledge in the universities of America. One of the most satisfying moments of his tour, a face-to-face meeting with many of the Ethiopian students. In gratitude, they present him with the silver service. He thanks them and replies that the gift he wants most is unity of purpose, their cooperation in quickening the pace of Ethiopian development. All are working toward this goal. They include Ephraim Isaac, who conducts the Harvard Graduate School Chorus. His mission? To found a conservatory in Addis Ababa, taking his doctorate at Harvard University, where President Kennedy was also graduated. At Cornell University, Ms. Abba Walda Rufail, a graduate nurse from Ethiopia, takes her degree in medical education so that she may go back to her country and instruct others how to teach this science. On the same campus, Bayena Chichai Balu, a former government agricultural agent from Harar in the eastern part of Ethiopia, digs deeper into the science of agronomy, learning to overcome the common problems that face men who work the soil in all parts of the world. His specialty is animal husbandry. Laboratory and field experiments relate to the types of problems he will find in helping to attain greater yields from Ethiopian fields and livestock. Aviation is essential to a nation like Ethiopia, with rugged terrain and isolated areas. This young man, Bayena Gulilat, is mastering the rudiments of flight at a Washington flying school, studying to be a commercial pilot, secure in the knowledge that the skills he is learning will be of importance to his country. And skills of America have been made available to these students through the dedication and foresight of their Emperor, Haile Selassie. His visit to the United States is brightened by their progress.